Okay, we'll talk later. Okay. Good evening, friends. Welcome to the third session this afternoon on the sixth day, on the 26th of February, on Auroville Convivial Talks. Today we have with us Ashavari, Vajrasara. So she calls herself Vajrasara, and Vajrasara is a transmedia artist working with image, movement, and text. She is the recipient of scholarship of both Kathak and academics from premier Indian and American institutions. Vajrasara has created critically acclaimed work both within classical dance and in intersections with theatre, video, and photography. Her work has been exhibited in prestigious dance and film festivals, as well as off-grid venues across India and the world. She has received numerous grants for her artwork from both Indian and foreign organizations and is the co-founder of Manifest Dance Film Festival India. Vajrasara is going to talk about Auroville, the power of the idea, an analysis of Auroville as a model of anti-capitalist and anti-imperialist resistance. Over to you, Vajrasara.
Thanks, Ribu. Thanks a lot, Ribu and Richa, for this opportunity. First of all, the idea is extremely interesting, and I, read some of the abstracts of the other speakers, and I wish that I could have heard most of them. And it reminded me actually of my early years when I first used to come to Auroville. I first came in 2004, and these spontaneous conversations would happen with Aurovillians about Auroville, and what you're doing seemed very similar to that. So, very, very interesting initiative. I really like the title, and thanks for giving me the opportunity. I was very excited to be a part of this, not just because being a Bengali I love to talk, but also because I think this is a way for me to really articulate something that I would not normally be able to. So thanks a lot. It lies so far outside of my other work. Uh, so thanks again for this.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
So I actually, after I sent you the abstract, I did refine it a little bit, and I decided that the areas that I'm going to look at. Or first of all, I think I'll just
You should
start.
also introduce yourself. How did you come across Auroville? In fact, you came across Auroville and you spoke about Auroville at one point of time to me, and I said that that time I didn't even want to know. I was busy, and then you came here and you lived here. So also tell us about your encounter with Auroville a bit.
Well, I first came in 2004 for a family wedding, and I didn't really feel anything then. But when I came back, I visited after that a couple of times. But it was when I came back in 2009, actually, to Adishakti, that I felt that I've come home. And I think that is really what this place means to me. And, I did join Auroville in 2018. I was announced as a newcomer, but I left. I wasn't sure if I was going to stay here. And when I came back, I mean, both my children have been to the kindergarten here. And we've lived here in a community and at the fringes for almost 8 years now, except for a little gap when we went back to Cal. And both my children study in the ashram school, and for me, Auroville is an extension of the ashram. I don't see any separation between that. Um, and really, personally, it's the place where I feel I'm home, and secondly, I feel that it is a harbor in the tempest. It is a oasis, and I'm going to get into specifically starting from how I think of myself as an artist, that I think of myself as an artist who is practicing a, a classical art in a post colonial country. I think of myself as a post colonial subject, and where political decolonization has not been followed by cultural decolonization. And so this is the context in which I think of myself as an artist, and this is also the my relation to how I'm going to speak about Auroville now. And after I sent my abstract, I thought that there's so many areas that Auroville inspires me in. The ashram inspires me, and the Auroville inspires me in. But I wanted to focus on specifically the anti-imperialist and anti-capitalist ramifications of the systems in Auroville, or the ramifications of Auroville. And for me, actually, Auroville is not an idea. It's not something that is intangible. By idea, I mean something that's purely intellectual or intangible. It has a concrete form. There is Auroville, there are buildings, there are systems in place, and again, um, I think strain that I want to focus on is the value of its systems in this anti-imperialist and anti-capitalist resistance or struggle. So I thought, the areas the things I wanted to talk about were money, land, um, food, and I thought, of course, also about schooling, because that was again an extremely important area of concern for me. And I thought, when I was trying to structure this talk, that food would probably be an interesting entry point into this very, very complex um, system that is Orwell, and a very complex counter resistance that I see it as. So, food, because it's so basic and it's absolutely, of course, universal, it's cliched, it's a universal meme. And at the most basic level, what Orwell has achieved with food, I wanted to talk about what, for instance, it has grown, what the farms have grown. And apparently the mother had wanted, one of the first things that the Aurovillians were supposed to do, and which also happened in the ashram, is to become self-sufficient in terms of growing the food, right? And again, right from the beginning, there was emphasis on growing organic food, which is the practice, which is how the food is grown. But also, I think if I begin with what is grown, so one of the things that you can find in Auroville is millets, and millets are now being sold as superfood, all over the world, and it's been termed the food of the future by the WHO very recently. But it's been a long practice in AV, and these are local millets. These are not imported millets like quinoa, which you now find in the metropolitan cities everywhere. So millets have been termed the future food because they are drought resistant, they're cheap, and they don't need to be grown with pesticides. And of course, millets are local to South India. So, the significance of growing local, cheap, non-GM food, and anticipating that there will be a need for that is, I think, one of the major contributions of Auroville. And again, the ramifications are manifold, right? So starting from individual health to, let's say, public health, and then we can move to a even larger arena, which I will come back to. Now, again, starting with what is grown. So, let's say millets is one thing that I focused on. There is, of course, a drive to grow local food and local vegetables. There is a consciousness that that has to happen. And once the food is processed, there are so many cafes and it's being sold in cafes. Once it's processed and once it's sold as a commodity, it's not the food that is sold is outside of the food industry that is that we see all over the globalized world. There are no trends. There is no trendy food. You won't suddenly see sweet potato fries in Auroville Cafe. It's not. It doesn't have Instagrammable menus. It doesn't menus all over the world. The major cities and the cafes have very, very similar menus and will change, but that does not hasn't happened mostly in the Auroville Cafe. So it is outside that food industry. It doesn't offer Coca-Cola, which to me was again, if you look at Coca-Cola as a symbol of American imperialism at McDonald's, there's a conscious decision not to sell Coca-Cola, and it sells alternatives like flour syrup sodas and things like that. And of course, the processed food that it sells is processed in small quantities with minimal preservatives. There are no food technologists, no industrial production happening here. And then again, and now, if I come to how this food is grown, it's organic and it's grown without GM, without chemical pesticides or too many chemical pesticides. And this is important again, not just for individual and public health, but as a sustainable agricultural practice. And when we talk about sustainability, I think something that doesn't get mentioned is that the dominant practices are unsustainable. This is something that is implied when you use the word sustainable agriculture, sustainable practices, but it doesn't. There is this discourse is missing that the current practices are unsustainable, and this is where it's linked to capitalism, the capitalist modes of production, and of course neo-imperialism, because agricultural trade and or agricultural land use is one of the areas where neo-imperialism is being very strongly contested, right? And the recent US trade deal that happened, which has dictated the tariffs that India cannot impose on US goods, and the amount of goods that India will need to buy from America every year for the next 5 years, which amounts to $500 billion in 5 years. Most of it is agricultural goods. So, if we look at the question of food self sufficiency and how it's related to food security, and if we extend the idea of Auroville as a community or a city to what the nation needs and to why food is such an important, such a basic, such a primal, and such a hotly contested area issue. This is one of the threads that I wanted to follow. And so, food self sufficiency and food security, and again, the reason why the way I'm linking it to neo-imperialism is because the way you use your agricultural land use, your decisions on what you grow and how you grow, uh, are being dictated by the World Bank to countries in the global south. The World Bank has been suggesting for decades now that countries in the global south should shift from growing food grains, they should import food grains, and that they should grow cash crops. And countries, the ex-colonial and the post-colonial countries have been resisting it because food grain prices tend to stay stable and cash crop prices fluctuate, and whenever there's an economic crisis the cash crop prices crash. And countries in Africa which have adopted this suggestion, they have faced something called globalization famines. And it has also made them vulnerable to the weaponization of sanctions by the US. So, this is again how food security, sustainable agriculture, self sufficiency in food production is a field of uh, counter resistance or direct struggle against imperial policies. And I think the other thing, again, coming back to food. So I talked about what this food is that is grown and its significance, how it's grown. And the third thing, which is so interesting, is the way it's consumed in Auroville. Is that there was an insistence right from the beginning that it should be a communal consumption of food. The mother didn't like the idea of having separate private kitchens and dining rooms, and she wanted everyone to eat in a communal way. And to me, that really is democracy in action. When everyone sits together, whether it's the person who's conceptualized the project or whether it's the person who's executed the project, if there are differences between these two areas, uh, that is for me real democracy in action. That not only are you eating the same food, you're sharing the same resources, but you're also eating in the same place and together. And the norm is of course to have family kitchens and family dining rooms, and the basic unit of society is the family. But the moment you shift it outside, and it becomes communal and outside of the family, you've already destabilized this unit, which some theorists have said is the basis of capitalism and patriarchy, the nuclear family. To expand it to the community is again a kind of radical intervention, I feel. And another thing is about food and the farm is that living here you don't have that kind of a rural urban disconnect. You personally, I can live in close proximity to farmers. I've eaten at the same table with farmers, I've had conversation with farmers, and that I feel is real solidarity. It's not just intellectual solidarity or moral sympathy with the farmers' situations, but to actually live and experience, let's say, the way I've experienced this solidarity is, for instance, when we've taken milk from one of the Auroville farms, and suddenly the supply stopped, and we were told it's because one of the cows was ill, and at that time my children had time, so we actually went and visited one of their cows, and we were constantly updated, and we knew where the cows lived, we knew what was happening, we were friends with the farmers. So this kind of solidarity with farmers is so important, especially in this time and in a country like India where that the number of farmer suicides that have happened from the 90s, from liberalization, when liberalization started, probably, I don't know if anyone has done this study, but it's probably equivalent to civilian deaths, during the freedom struggle. I'm not sure, but I feel that this proximity and the kind of opportunity that that you get to really interact with farms, with farmers, is the basis of a kind of a concrete solidarity with agricultural practice with farmers. So I think this is the significance, and this is how I wanted to look at food as an entry into how Auroville and its models and systems um, are forging resistance and could be a model for um, future resistance. And it's even showing the way, showing the areas in which you need to work. Um, so I have 10 minutes and I will then quickly, shall we just go into questions? I just wanted to talk about
No, you
land.
want to speak about money and education.
Money and I think land ownership also. I think one of the things that flows me about Auroville is that there is no land ownership legally, and it's the idea of not having private property. Of course, it strikes at the heart of capitalism, but it's not replaced by state ownership, right, or even a welfare state. It is by individual consent, which is completely unique. And I think that to moving from that to actually talk about or envision a time when there will be no need for even governance, or let's say self governance, is one of the concrete ways out of these political systems. Yeah. So, and I'll come back to this in my conclusion. The other thing is, of course, about money. That Orwell is intended to lie outside the money economy, and it doesn't mean replace cash with digital money, but just that money is not that work or labor should not be tied to income. That again is an idea that strikes at the heart of capitalism, of globalized finance, capital, or even if you look at it in a very domestic example, the notion of paid work and then the notion of its corollary, which is unpaid work, which is usually gendered and which is tied to patriarchy. Um, it destabilizes all of that. And I think destabilize is also a very mild term for what Auroville does, because it's not just about a destabilizing or intellectual deconstruction. It is offering a living, breathing example and an alternative. And so much of capitalism has been justified by saying that there is no alternative. This, I think, is the real value of Auroville, that it shows you. To me, it's an extremely concrete manifestation of alternatives. And yeah, I think I'll end here because we can continue.
So good to hear that we often kind of take some of the things that you spoke of for granted, or it appears like a kind of a losing battle. Good that you have been here for a little while, you're from the fringes, you put light onto something which we take for granted. What exactly does those things mean, and how radically important those small little gestures or values of Orville, that which kind of, uh, as you said, that are a direct questioning to the capitalist form of functioning. How do you think you have also been seeing Orville for the past 5 6 years, and you the kind of you spoke about the trade deal and also the current situation where there is a kind of a decision paralysis, a lot of anxiety within the community, which I'm sure you must be guessing, a lot of investments which are happening in the fringe of Auroville. Do you think that Auroville will be able to survive this resistance, or are we kind of in an extremely critical juncture at this moment? How do you see that from?
So I think that first of all, there has been a trend of dismissing Orwell as an idea. Now, if it were, I think the very fact that there is an attack shows that it's not an idea, right? The attack is very concrete. It's if there is an attack. So I think first of all, maybe Orwellians should congratulate themselves on the fact that this more than anything underlines the fact that it is a living, breathing, very material fact. And I think something like Orwell will always be under attack by the other, always, right? Because Orwell, by its very being, is a critique. If there was no Orwell, the victory would be complete. But just by being, it's a big threat. It's not small and it's not tiny at all. And I think if you do think of Auroville as a very small place, with a very limited number of residents, and then why should such huge machinery be spent on attacking it? Or let's say, why should, and it's similar to the attack on a university or a college. Why does the state need to bring in so many resources to attack a few students? So there must be something extremely powerful happening there. So I think that is, first of all, Aurovillians should congratulate themselves, and they should stop thinking of Auroville just as an idea, and stop thinking about it as an experiment. I don't think. I think it's after 50 years, Auroville to me is a step. It's not an experiment. You could have talked about it as an experiment in the initial stages before there was any concrete manifestation that happened. But Orwell is a step in a certain direction, and it will always be under threat from the others. But I also wanted to just finish something. I did talk about politics, but I also wanted to talk about this fact that what is again special about the idea underlying Uru and the ashram is that not only was it intended as an alternative social system, or, or even as alternative system to politics as a whole, because I feel that what the thesis is, the premise is that all political systems are flawed because the human being is flawed. And I feel that the introduction of a moral or ethical critique is so valuable and so important, and it's almost ontological, because it's saying that the human being has to morally and ethically improve to be ready for any political system, right? So all these political systems, whether it's capitalism or communism or welfare statism, all of them are doomed to fail because the human being is not is morally or ethically not ready. And this subject is not something that you hear about in political philosophy. It's not something that is in that discourse. So I think that is extremely important.
So it is something like Devashish Banerjee was talking about, based in kind of psychology. There has to be that the we need to kind of have a. Do you think that Orwell's approach towards or this aspiration to have a kind of a post-democratic and post-nationalistic, spiritual, anarchic, is kind of is there kind of a psychologically, it, it is a possibility, or like do you see Aurovillians like that? In terms of who can kind of uh, go beyond their colonial and imperial nostalgia towards this post-democratic, spiritual, anarchic like, existence? What kind of a courage one needs to have to be able to stand to be talking to the powers then? Because also you were speaking about this attack as an attack. A lot of other Aurovilian, the conversation I had there, for them it was like, no, it's not an attack. I understand there is a fear, or uh, so how do you see that from outside? You're seeing, you tried, you were almost uh, been a part of this community, and then you have been seeing it from outside. Do you think in gesture we kind of reflect such values?
Two things. I think, I would say, and similar to the ashram from the 60s and 70s, that the children who were growing up then and the second generation in Auroville and the ashram were multi-ethnic, right? And they were multinational because you had parents from different ethnicities and different nations. So already in practice, the idea of a nationality uh, is being challenged, right? What nationality does someone who has a French parent and a Tamil parent have? And then how do they align themselves as imperialists or neo-imperialists? That's, you can see that in action in Orwell. Uh, and more all over the world, which is why it's so interesting what you said, that again in this world, and Orwell of course is reflecting the world is increasingly multinational, and dual citizenships, the idea of a single citizenship or a single nationality or a single linguistic identity also has become very old fashioned. And how do we then still continue being colonial apologists or chauvinists? How does that happen? I think it's probably a lack of reflection and a lack of information, because the complex that controls information, it's not just military industrial, right? It's military industrial, parliamentary, academic, think tank, it's media. The whole complex is so powerful, that, let's say, information about farmer suicides and what's actually happening, you won't see that on mainstream media. But I do think that living here as ex colonizers in a country which you have formally colonized, uh, if there is no reflection on that, I don't understand how that can be. And maybe this information, which has been resisted, this fact that Western economies and Western prosperity has not come about just by hard work or technological innovation. It has come about from destroying the economies of the global south and from where immigrants are moving. I don't think it's possible to live here and not reflect on an issue like immigration, and that someone, an Indian, let's say, who's living in the West or in a European country is an immigrant, and what is that immigrant experience? Whereas if you are European and you're living here, but in Auroville, you are not an immigrant, are you? And that's because of Auroville. But right, so I don't know why the limits of self-reflection on individuals, but maybe as a community, um, there could be some initiative to talk a little bit more about this. Ribu, I feel even from any general discourse, whether in academia or anywhere mainstream, public discourse, post-colonial or colonial issues and imperial issues are kind of always sidelined, right? So like gender and race, and these things always take a prominence. Um,
Yeah, thank you to kind of bring these things up. And yes, you brought up some things which are extremely critical and touchy. We kind of choose other words and other ways of skirting the issue. Thank you, making it particular. Thank you, Vajrasara, for joining us. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rivu Richa, and hopefully this will be a quid pro quo, and you will soon be talking for us.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
See you.
See you.